I think we'll get going. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all the blank screens that I see. My name is Narissa Dozo. I'm the Ethics and Wellbeing Hub coordinator. In the Ethics and Wellbeing Hub, we do a lot of research on platforms like MTurk and Prolific, and so I received a couple very hurried emails in the new climate that we live in from people wanting to know how to use the program. So today is really going to be a general introduction to the two platforms and hopefully give you a good start in terms of resources for everyone. For the question that will the recording be available after the session? Yes. We'll get to that, I promise, but feel free to keep asking questions in the chat as well. So I'll start with, because I'm sure my introduction slides will explain a couple of things. So firstly, you've all been muted and video has been turned off because my NBN is just that great. So if for some reason you're not muted, please do mute your microphone while you're speaking. You can do this in the bottom left-hand corner and unmute yourself at any point to ask any questions as well. You can do it in the chat function, that's totally fine. Or you can also feel free to temporarily unmute yourself and just interrupt me during this. If anything, that would kind of be appreciated so I don't feel like a crazy person just talking to myself here. Treat this like any live classroom as well, so feel free to just chime in at any point. Like I said, we have the chat function as well that a couple of people already know how to use. I feel like we've all been given a very quick crash course into how to use Zoom. If you cannot hear me, if I'm going too fast at any stage, or if there's something that you want me to go back to explain, again, chat function or unmute yourself, just let me know. And major props to anyone that already has a bingo card or a drinking game ready for all Zoom meetings. So I'm sure I'll tick off some of those things today. I thought I'd start off immediately with just a caveat of I'm by no means an expert on either of these platforms. I always refer to sort of online guides, the power of Reddit and Twitter and the internet, and also all the PhD students whose information I've totally borrowed for today's presentation. So this is also just going to be a really general introduction to the two platforms with a list of resources to get you all started. And it by no means is now going to be the gold standard for what you should follow. Just hopefully we'll give you a crash course in it, like we're getting crash courses in everything. And then you'll be able to sort of figure your own way out as you start using the platform. So again, feel free to at any point unmute yourself to chat about anything. Also, if you have any of your own experiences on these platforms, please feel free to share them. By no means do I want this to just be my opinion throughout all of this. And so I had a GIF all prepared for this, Douglas, but yes, the session will be recorded and all material will be made available on the Ethics and Wellbeing website afterwards. I'll send around an email to a couple of people to let you all know when that's there. And also you can follow us on Twitter. We have a newly created Ethics and Wellbeing Hub Twitter account, and I'll post a message on there when all of this is available. All right. So today what we're going to be covering is an introduction to sort of what is MTurk and Prolific Academic. We're going to get straight out of the way just money and what does it mean, how much does it pay participants, and how does it all work. I'll give you, like I said, a broad introduction to both of the platforms, and also we'll talk about some sort of complicated study designs or longitudinal if you have them, which ones you should use, not that I have a favorite or anything, and a couple of resources to get you going. So again, really broad general introduction to the platform, but hopefully ready for you to go with any of your studies. So what is MTurk and Prolific? So MTurk is short for Mechanical Turk, and Prolific was formerly known as Prolific Academic, but is now just Prolific, are both crowdsourcing marketplaces, making it easier for researchers to connect with participants worldwide. So MTurk has its own terminology of you as a requester are publishing your human intelligence tasks, so they're called HITs. As such as an online study or any survey that you want people to do, and participants in this case are known as workers. They scroll through the MTurk board and choose whichever one they want to participate in for whatever money that you're offering to pay. Prolific is very similar to MTurk, except it was sort of created in the mindset for research studies. So it was actually created by PhD students wanting to have a better platform for being able to run their studies online. And it works in the same way, except there's no random terminology. You're the researcher, your participants are participants, and same thing, they scroll through the studies that they're eligible for and choose the ones that they want to participate for. So the way that I kind of view both of these platforms is just their job boards in a sense, or a board that they can scroll through and decide which thing that they want to participate in. So getting money straight out of the way, obviously the way that this works is you're paying participants for their time to take part in your research. So the two big things to get out of the way is that MTurk is run in the US, which means it's US dollars, and Prolific is run in the UK, which means it's British pounds. And unfortunately, thanks to the current exchange rate, that means some of your budgets are going to be slashed in half. So you do have to sort of consider that when it comes to paying people. MTurk works by pre-purchasing hits, so pretty much loading money onto your MTurk account before you can run any studies. You can only load $2,000 a day via a credit card. That's just how MTurk works. You can speak to Praz about using the school credit card to do this. Just realize that probably there are a lot of us now that are trying to upload money to our MTurk account, so it might take a little bit of time till everything gets uploaded on there. One caveat is that you cannot refund or return any of the money that's uploaded on MTurk. So it has to only be used for studies and can't be given back to you, even if you only have 5 cents on there. That stays with MTurk. Prolific, you top up your account in the same way before you can launch any studies. This can be done by credit card, bank transfer, on invoice. Invoicing is actually the preferred method within the school because it allows it to be made out to the school, your specific hub or lab or supervisor. The one thing though to be aware here is that finance only pays invoices at the end of every month. So if you submit one now to get money uploaded on Prolific, it won't be up there until the end of April for you to then kind of run studies in May. So that's just a kind of a small caveat there, but you can, the advantage here of Prolific is that you can refund and return any money that is unused on there. So if you kind of reach all the end of your studies and you still have $10 remaining on the account, you can go nuts from there. So, sorry, I'm just gonna change that, cool. All right, like I said, yes, this means your budget will be slashed in half or a little less thanks to the current exchange rate. So just as an example, the Ethics and Wellbeing Hub recently put a bunch of money on Prolific Academic so that we can all run it. And just as an example, we went to upload 20,000 Australian dollars and that only resulted in about 11,000 British pounds. So it is something to be aware of that, yes, there are a lot of advantages that it's cheaper to use these platforms, but it just does mean that currently the Australian dollar isn't doing so grand with everything. Cool. All right, so I'll dive straight into MTurk unless there were any general questions there. I thought I'd just pause for a second and also take a breath. No, all good. All right, so MTurk is based in the USA with a participant pool worldwide. They do have participants in Australia, India, France, Germany, and many others all listed on their website. However, the majority of participants come from the US. We suspect that the reason for this is that it might be due to payments. The US workers can get whatever money they earn on MTurk directly deposited into their bank account, whereas everyone outside of the US, the money just turns into Amazon gift cards. So it's a great way for, Amazon keeping all the money to themselves. So for example, if you wanted to use the Australian participants on there, yeah, they can only use the money then back on Amazon. So sometimes that turns people off because they don't really want gift cards. They want actual money to keep them going. So when you're setting up your MTurk account for the very first time, you can do this with any email, but my recommendation is to use something that is shared or controlled by your hub or lab. This just allows sort of you to have a more central system, sort of a better outward facing look to everyone as well. The thing to be aware of though is that all emails from any of your participants will come through to this email address. So if you are sharing an account with your hub or lab, everyone needs to be able to access it. So, be careful about using Unimeld shared mailboxes because that means that only people who are staff or students can access it versus something like a shared Gmail. If you have any issues with MTurk, such as getting refunds back from them in case of bad participants, you have to use the email associated with your MTurk account, so make sure you always know those login details. You'll also need to share those login details with Praz if you're using the school credit card to upload any money to the account. He'll also want to check in on the budget every now and again just to make sure everything's working. If you are sharing your account as well, the other recommendation is to change your password at the end of the year. We have a shared MTurk account amongst the hub, and I change the password at the end of every year just in case there are any other random students. I mean, I don't know what anyone would want to do with the MTurk details, but just to be safe rather than sorry. So you've created your MTurk account, you're ready to go, you have a study that you want to launch up on there. So you start by simply creating a new project. And the most common thing that's pretty much put up on MTurk is surveys. And so this is literally just directing people to a Qualtrics survey that you have them doing, and any sort of like experiments or videos that you have throughout there. This doesn't mean that you can't link things to other platforms. You just have to be careful, and I will talk about this, about Amazon's terms of service and what they do and don't allow you to link to. And you also, I think just my number one recommendation, and I'll repeat this throughout today's talk, is just pilot. It's always better to make a mistake with a couple of people than to launch with 1,000 and then realize that something isn't working. So commonly we use it a lot of the time just for really basic surveys. So you get up there, you start to create your study. So simply, what's your project name? So this is what's not displayed to the actual worker. This is just to you. So within the hub, we have a naming convention. It just helps me keep track of who's running studies in there. So things like just having the initials of the person who's running the study and something basic for them so they remember the study. So like if they're doing objectification research, it might say objectification. Again, really recommend this if you're using a shared account. Title, so this is displayed to the workers and will be the first thing that they see if they want to participate in your study. Be as specific as you can without giving away any of the important details. So remember, we're always trying to go for a little bit of hiding of what's going on. We also recommend here in MTurk including timing information, because this might either be the thing that appeals to people or repels them from doing your study. So obviously, if you have a shorter study, you can get away with paying a bit less, but if you have a longer study, you're going to be paying more, and MTurkers have their preferences. Some of them love participating in the long studies that pays more. Others just want quick 10-minute tasks that they get paid little for and they're out. So really recommend putting the timing information there. Description, workers will also use this to decide whether they want to accept the task. Provide as much information as you can. So we sort of say, like, read a brief description of social experiences and one possible interpretation, rate your agreement with the interpretation. The other thing that we sort of recommend here as well is warning people if you've sort of got anything within your study that might be controversial or they're not going to like. So as I'll touch on later, MTurkers are getting really sick of seeing like really large screens of just Likert scales. So do you agree on a scale of 1 to 7 to these 100 items? It's just boring for them. I think they've been exposed to it a lot because MTurk has been around for a lot. So you kind of probably want to warn them from the get-go. I think it's always safer to just tell them there what it's going to be so that they know before they decide to do your study, and they can choose to not do it, which just makes life a lot easier. Sorry. Go back. And just keywords as well there, sorry, are searchable by people as well. But I think a lot of the time, a lot of the stuff on MTurk will be survey. So. All right, so how much do you pay them? So firstly, before you get started with even thinking about paying them, work out how long your study takes. So one of the advantages here is that if you were to take a participant into the lab, it doesn't matter if your study takes 35 minutes, you have to pay them for a full hour. Whereas sort of the advantage, I guess, of MTurk or Prolific is if your study only takes 30 minutes, you're already paying them for 30 minutes. You're not paying them for the full hour. But you calculate everything on an hourly rate. So in the States, the federal minimum is $7.25 US, which is quite low. And the thing to be aware of is that a lot of states differ. So for example, Washington and California have $13 US as their minimum wage, which seems a lot more reasonable to actually live off. At the very least, when you're deciding how much to pay your participants, it should be at the minimum wage. But there's been a lot of recent discussion lately about the overuse of MTurk participants. So you really should consider paying them more where possible. Again, I understand our balance of our budgets are slashed thanks to the exchange rate, but we have this sort of advantage of getting away with paying workers like relatively low amounts, really only paying them for the time they invest in the study, not having to pay them for a whole hour. And so you want to kind of balance sort of this moral ambiguity, I guess, on how much you should be paying participants. The other thing to be aware of is workers are also going to prioritize higher paying tasks. And so we tend to acknowledge that we want to keep them happy and on board. So if you're paying more as well, you're going to get participation through to your study a lot quicker. So again, a 30-minute study should offer a minimum of $3.70 and a 15-minute study is $1.80. So like I said, you can get away with paying pretty, especially if your study only runs 15 minutes, $1.80 is super cheap for a participant. Again, I really want to stress that we would recommend higher levels. We're kind of having this conundrum as well within the Ethics and Wellbeing Hub of what to pay. So I just think have that discussion amongst your lab hub with your supervisor as to what should be the minimum that you pay participants. So you put how much they're going to get paid here. And again, this will be seen really obviously from the participants from the get-go. Now, number of respondents here, and I'll get to this on the next slide. Usually this would be the number of participants you want in total. So for example, if you wanted to collect 100 people, but MTurk has slightly increased their fees. Pretty much it's just been defined as a price gouge. There's no other way around it. So I'll explain that in the next slide and also the workaround for that so that you're not paying the higher fees. Time allotted per worker. This is not actually how long you think the study will take, but rather how long they can have it open. So keep it longer than what your actual study is. If your study takes 30 minutes, you might want to keep the time allotted at 2 hours. The thing to be aware of is that's how long the participants can have the study open for before they kind of also decide to return it. So obviously what participants are doing is they're coming to MTurk, they're seeing what studies are up there, they'll then open in a new window your study and they can sort of decide, do they really want to do it or do they want to return the hit and let someone else do it and not take up the job in a sense. So if you leave that time allotted as to way too long, that means that you're going to have people that are on there for way too long, just kind of wasting a study space until it becomes open later. So you're really wanting to kind of limit it around the time frame of how long your study takes so that if then also a participant decides to open up your study and then walk away from their computer and watch a movie, after a while we'll kick them out and allow an actual good participant to take part in your study. So how long then the expiration is about how long your study is active. This really won't matter as much as I say that sometimes participants are terrible in terms of, opening up a study and walking away. If anything, you should have your sample completed within a couple of hours. So you really just want it to be, like we said, the expiry at sort of around 7 days if you need to keep it open that late. But my thing is if you haven't collected all your participants within 2 days, something has gone wrong or you need to, work out what's up with your study. Auto approve. So workers can see this and tend to choose short auto approved timeframes. So this is how quickly the money pretty much just gets approved to be sent to them. So their payment. You can manually obviously approve people as you go through this, but if for any reason you also forget, so you launched a study and you had plenty of other things going on in this climate and didn't get back to it, if you set this to 2 days, it means in 2 days everyone gets paid regardless of what's going on, which is good to sort of protect you in a long, like I said, if you haven't had the chance to get it done. All right, so the price gouge. So long story short, MTurk now charges, as they always have, a 20% fee, but then they decided to add another 20% fee for anything over 10 participants. So a 40% fee in total. I don't know of anyone that can run a study with only 10 participants, so their reasoning really here is non-existent, and I don't get why they didn't just say we're making this a 40% fee. However, thanks to lovely researchers and people on the internet, they've come up with a workaround that pretty much runs your studies in batches of 10 or less participants, ultimately refreshing your study at every 10 participants till you reach whatever your maximum is. So if you're collecting 100 participants. So that means that then you're avoiding this extra price gouge of the 20% fee and you're just paying the 20% on each, which will work out exactly the same as if it was 20% for all 100. I'm not going to spend any time explaining how to do this workaround. I've linked it here, and these are the slides. Charles Foster at Stanford Laboratory for Social Research, they've done an amazing job of literally the slides of step-by-step instructions on how to have the workaround. I also believe that there's now an R package that you can install that sort of does this more quickly for you as well if you don't want to bother with sort of the Excel document and a couple of coding. So yeah, I'm really not going to waste any time sitting here trying to explain all of that to you. I think it's a lot easier if you just go check out their really good slides and go for it. And the great thing is, because it's a Google Doc, you'll see that there are always people active on it. So everyone is trying to find out how to get away with this workaround. There's a section about worker requirements. So there are these things called masters on MTurk who've completed over 5,000 studies and they've been given excellent ratings. They cost more and there doesn't seem to be any evidence that they're any better at participating in studies, or quite frankly, do you need them to be any better? So we recommend making sure that you say no to this requirement as you're going through MTurk. If you, when you launch a study, notice that you're not sort of getting participants in relatively quickly, so for example, if your study is taking 15 minutes, you should notice after 20 or 30 minutes that you've got a couple people completed your study. Most common mistake that people make is they've accidentally switched on this master's qualification, and so you just pretty much need to go in, stop your study, and restart it again with that turned off. You'll also ask for certain qualifications to restrict who can take your study. So to maximize the quality, we recommend that you make sure that they're hit. So these are how much approval that they've received on tasks that they've done is greater than 90%, that they've probably done over 100 studies, but you can reduce this if you'd like as well. And you might also want to set your location to the US, as 2 of the primary samples on MTurk are US or India. So if you've got any concerns with having Indian participants, you might just want to limit that to US only. I've got a note down here on if you ever have pre-screening stuff. So for example, when I did my PhD, I only wanted female participants to take part in a larger study. But you know, the joys of the internet is I can't just say, you know, females only, because anyone will do it then. I have no way of verifying that. What I had though was a screening questionnaire. So I asked a whole bunch of demographic questions like their age, their gender, their location, their religious views, etc. And it was only then women who were given a bonus survey. So everyone for that first survey was paid 5 cents because it literally took a minute for them to get through. And then women were given the bonus survey, and we didn't ever tell them why they were given the bonus survey. It was just, congratulations, you've qualified. And we never mentioned what the demographic thing was there. The also good thing that you'll sometimes realize with MTurk, hilariously, I had someone who went to the study, but my study was pretty obvious that it was some women because it was asking about their menstrual cycle. And I had someone who ended up returning the hit and sending me an email being like, I apologize, I'm a man, and lied in the demographics and decided to like return your hit because I felt bad taking money for a study that was clearly not for me. So MTurk participants can be pretty great about knowing if they have lied to get through to your bonus survey that they'll back out of it. Then you really get to the design phase of things. Here you'll just design the look of your study and include a few basic instructions for your participants. So this is where you'll include a link, a reminder that they should probably open the study in a new tab so that they can leave their MTurk one open. The reason we recommend this is because usually what we see is you create your study and then at the very end of your study, you generate a random code for participants to enter back into MTurk. So it sort of gives you an easy way to scroll down a giant list and see if they've all actually participated in your study to the very end. Most MTurkers are completely used to this. This is common through a lot of the studies. And so there's plenty of instructions listed at the end on how to do these codes to send people back to MTurk as well. Here you also might want to list if you have any restrictions on devices or browsers. So a lot of the time, some of my studies just don't work on Internet Explorer. So I ask them not to be using that browser. Is it okay if they're using your experiment on mobile as well, or should they be on a laptop or computer? When everything looks good, so you've previewed everything, you're ready to go. So a couple of things to remember before you launch is simply, if you're using US participants, are you launching at a good time? So depending on the time zone that you're after, you might have to launch at midnight or something like that in order to hit your participants at the right time in the US. Do you have ethics clearance for your study? And does your lab or hub or supervisor know about you using these funds depending on where they're coming from? I really recommend the ethics clearance one because I totally had during my PhD where I almost accidentally ran a study with no ethics clearance because it's so easy to create your survey on Qualtrics, upload it to MTurk, and you're like, yeah, I'm ready to go. And then it wasn't until I was reading the first page, I was like, oh, there's no ethics number here listed here because I never passed this by ethics. So then you're quickly scrambling to do that. And then are you 100% sure about how long your study takes? Again, really recommend this just to make sure that you're not underestimating how long it takes and therefore underpaying your workers, or also that you're not overestimating, that you can see how things go. So when your study is live, this is what participants are going to see. So this is you here as the requester. This is the title that you have, and these are all the details of how many people you're accepting into this. what they're being paid, how long ago your study was made live, etc. So they can go in and read different, they can preview here by reading all your different requirements of the study, and they can choose to accept and work. Some of these have different qualifications. So I created this account, and obviously I'm an Australian, and so these ones are clearly only for US participants, so I don't qualify for them. Okay, and then you start to watch the data roll in. So this is sort of the manage view that you'll have. So up in create was all the stuff that I was just telling you about how to create your survey. And then in manage is where you'll be able to watch batches in progress. So I currently don't have any active ones. So I can just show you these old ones that we had. So you'll be able to watch completed responses. So pretty much this tab building along slowly. Like I said, if your study takes about 15 minutes, check in around the 20-30 minute mark and see how many you have completed. If you really don't have anyone at 30 minutes, like that's done your study, something probably has gone wrong. With participants galore, your data collection should be pretty quick. 100 participants might be collected in only a couple of hours. You can stop any live studies if there's an error, and this is actually a great example of that. So this one, we were like, what's going on? We've only had 9 participants. It was active for a couple of days. And that was where we realized we had that master's qualification switched on when we didn't want it. So stop, restart, and then data collection was completed in only a couple of minutes after that.
Narissa, could I ask a question?
Yeah, shoot, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So if you were to stop a batch partway through, if anyone was still in the middle of doing your survey, would that cancel it on those people, or would they be allowed to finish? And
no, that's a good question. They're allowed to finish, yeah. So they're given the opportunity to finish. And then you'll still be paying all those participants even if you stop. So if there's an error in your survey and you decide to stop your data collection, anyone that's still in there will be allowed to finish, unless of course there's something really wrong with your study that wasn't working. And my advice would be that you just pay them, because that's not their fault that your study isn't working or that you've done something wrong. It's just that they're live, they're finished, and then your study stops. So you're not collecting any new participants from that point.
Cool, thanks for that.
No worries. Guys, please ask questions as well. I seriously feel so weird just talking to myself. This is such a weird experience. Okay. So communication etiquette, if something has gone wrong, participants were unable to enter their code, or if they have any issues, you'll receive an email. You really should be on top of your email as well, no matter what time you're launching. So if, especially in that first hour, to check for, are your participants coming through? Is there anything wrong? Especially if you're launching at bad hours in the US, so this Australia. So yep, you might have to be awake at 4 a.m. So that you can respond to these questions in a timely manner, and so that you can also stop a survey if something has gone wrong with it. So we really recommend that you respond to all questions, you approve all your payments promptly, and I will add into the slide, thank you for that question, Erin, that you should really be approving anyone even if your study has gone wrong, because again, it's not the participant's fault, it's kind of a thing that you have to take on yourself. Don't screen people without pay. So this was the thing that I was telling you about, running a demographic survey to bounce the right people to your second survey. Don't do this by sort of, rejecting all the males that completed your study. That's not the way that it works. And like I said earlier as well, MTurk is really starting to hate large scale designs. So try to find ways to either warn participants about it, break it apart, include images, include breaks, something like that, so that they have something visually different to look at, and just always be nice and say thank you, because we are very grateful to have this participant pool with us. I'll go back quickly. So this was just the paying participant screen. Again, all these slides will be shared, so if anything that I spoke about doesn't connect, hopefully that'll make sense. So you'll just be able to approve all participants back here. So I'll continue on with rejecting participant payment. So like I said, MTurk, and I can put some of these resources in there just so that people can see that sort of MTurk has been suffering what they're kind of calling a crisis in terms of bad faith participants and low quality data. There is no foolproof method for eliminating either of these, but you can put checks into place to sort of have evidence to reject some of these participants. I also want to say that there has been recent studies that show that though there is sort of some of these bots and some people are experiencing problems, they're a very small number of your total participants, because I think the thing is perhaps if you're running a study of 100, you've got 3, and then if Erin's running 100, she's only got 2, and someone else is running 100 and they've got 2. So it's not like all 100 terrible participants are in your study. They just happen to be spread about across the many, many studies that are up on MTurk. So our advice in the hub is sort of changing now. Previously, we would have said approve all your participant payments. And I still kind of agree with that, mostly because we are getting away with paying them so little. But the thing is if they're failing multiple attention checks that they have in there, you're sort of approving people that don't deserve to be approved, quite frankly. So the way that we see it is warn participants up front that you might be rejecting them, include multiple attention checks within your study, and then you can send them an email as well to explain why they've been rejected from the study. So it just allows you to not necessarily waste all your precious funding now as well, but you also want to be able to back up and kind of say, okay, I have proof that this person really wasn't doing anything to pay attention in my study. And it kind of continues to reward the really good participants on MTurk, and there are a lot of them out there. So I really recommend as well the warnings, just so that you're giving them plenty of chances to choose to not participate in your study, because that's the other thing. Sometimes bad participants will steer your study, see all your warnings about not wanting to take part, and they'll just be like, you know what, I'm just not going to do it then. That's fine. If they're going to reject me, I'm not going to take part. So that works out as well. So here are some ways to sort of check for bad faith participants or bots. These come from many different people that have used things like analogies. So the idea is to create an analogy that you wouldn't find on Google, and you have an answer for it. And so you're sort of seeing these responses. Response speed is a great one. So if you're doing something in Qualtrics, you can actually turn on the recording of how long a participant takes on each page. And then you can kind of divide that by the number of questions you have. And if someone is really taking 1 second per question that you have on page, they're not paying attention, and you can probably reject them. Response consistency is a great one. Most of these come from Reb. I want to thank him for all of this. So if you are asking the same question in multiple different ways, so if you're asking, what's the weather like today? And was it sunny? And something else later. And if they're obviously responding in wildly different ways, and suddenly the weather was great, but then, you know, maybe this doesn't apply to Melbourne because the weather can change in 10 minutes. But you get what I mean. You're asking the same question in multiple different ways to see if they're answering in the same format. And if they're not, then, you know, you might be questioning how much they're paying attention between each of your pages. Unusual comments. So we really recommend at the end of your study always just having an open box section where you can sort of ask a question if you'd like, or just say, please provide any feedback. If they're writing in capitals letters, if they're single and irrelevant words, or if they've clearly copied and pasted something from Google, then you probably, again, have a reason to reject those participants. Attention checks. So really common ones that you will always see in studies is, you know, on item 10, please respond agree. And so that's an easy way to see if they're doing okay there. English proficiency and cultural checks are becoming more common as we're getting participants from different countries. If you're only trying to target US and you're getting someone completely random in there. So you can have things like, which of the following words is most related to Moody? Participants aren't familiar with English might struggle with this. Cultural checks are things like, the most common one that I've seen is eggplant. So this was mostly to catch out participants from India who were using VPNs to bounce into the US to do studies. And so they were getting caught out because in India it's brinjal, apologies for that terrible pronunciation. And so that was an easy way to bust that probably your participants weren't from the US. Another one as well is the month and date format. So in the US, they write it month, date, year, whereas we would write it date, month, year. So I mentioned earlier about acceptable use of MTurk and how commonly it is used for surveys. This isn't to say that you can't do it for different, more complicated experiments if you have something online, or different studies that are run online. Just a couple of things to note is that MTurk doesn't allow you to collect any personal information. So for example, emails, if you wanted to contact them later, you always have to use sort of MTurk's weird emailing system. You also cannot ask them to use or download a different program that they have to register for. So they can use a different program, for example, if you're just getting them to open up something in a different browser that then launches them into an experiment. But for example, if people are using SEMA, which I know some people in the school are using, which is an app on your phone for getting notifications to do surveys, they have to register for that as well, and MTurk doesn't allow that, so you can't use them to then get them to download SEMA and register on that. So I've listed the acceptable use policy for anyone that needs to check. Obviously, if you're not just doing survey-based research, you need to check whether your stuff can work here. All right, any questions or a chance for me to just take a break? Nope. Okay, I'm acknowledging the time, so I'm gonna keep going through. The session might run a little bit later than 11, I guess, just so that I can make sure that I get through everything, but if you need to leave earlier, that's perfectly fine. Apologies for all the glitches that we've had. All right. So Prolific Academic, now simply known as Prolific, was created by PhD students who just wanted a cleaner, more functional way for running studies. They pretty much shamelessly capitalized on MTurk's problems as well to say that, you know, we don't have bots and we don't have this problem. That's debatable. I think they definitely still have some of their own problems, but the platform sure is a lot nicer to use than MTurk. I'm not going to lie about that. So in the same vein, similar to MTurk, you can set up a Prolific account with then email. But unlike MTurk, all the communication is actually in Prolific through just a messaging service that they have online. So pretty much just looks like any Facebook chat that you would have as well. If you do email Prolific for any support related to a specific study that's being run in your account, you have to email them from your registered email account. So I can't email from my general uni Melb account to ask about the ethics and wellbeing stuff. It has to come from that direct email. So when you're creating a new study, again, just a little bit cleaner, what's your study called? So this is the name that's seen by participants, describe what they will be doing. So this is just a simple description on what is involved. There's no real need to provide timing information here because you'll see in the next tab that I show where Prolific will also calculate how long they sort of have to go on the study, and all of that information will be displayed to them. And then internal names, this again just makes it easier for you to keep track of stuff. When we were running multi-day studies, we just wanted to put the internal name as what the actual day was rather than showing it to participants. So you have a study link and parameters. So this is again where you're just sort of inserting where you're taking your participants to. You will enter the study link and also include any parameters that you want to record in Prolific. So you'll be able to download an Excel file from Prolific, which will actually tell you all the participant IDs, plus a couple of pre-screening things that Prolific has within there. So when I mentioned MTurk, sort of if you wanted to do any of this, you had to say, run like a demographics type survey and then only bonus or give additional participants your bonus survey. Prolific actually already has a lot of this information because it gets its participants to do a screening questionnaire. So it gets them to say what their gender is, what their age, what their location is. And so you can again have all this information also recorded in Prolific. So there's no actual need for you to collect it in your study, for example, because you can then download that from Prolific and just match the IDs across. So you'll be able to collect study ID, session ID, if there's any need that you want or from all of that. And Prolific provides you examples on how to be able to record all that information here at the very end of your URL. It's also really important in Prolific, it encourages, same as MTurk, to have these completion codes. They just make it a little bit easier by providing you an automatic URL that you can redirect people. So you can do this in Qualtrics by, rather than when they finish the study, it just automatically redirects them to this additional link, which then enters the code for them so you know that the participants are coming from the right place. Just a note here that submissions marked as like incorrect, such as no code sometimes, doesn't necessarily mean that they're invalid. It might just mean that perhaps exactly like I'm experiencing, the internet cut out as they were trying to redirect. And so no code got entered, their browser might have died or something like that. So the thing that you always want to go back and check is just in your actual raw study data, you'll have their Prolific code there. Did they get through the study, and therefore, you know, to pay them. So your participants, like I said, Prolific has participants complete a pre-screening questionnaire when they first sign up, and they also verify a couple of these things. So if they're uni students or if they're employed, they sometimes get them to register with additionally their uni email so that you know that they're students. They also sometimes get some participants to upload photos of ID that they verify, so driver's license for their location, whether they're employed, etc. So this kind of makes it easier for you if you want to limit your study to who will see it, and you'll just be doing that by applying a custom pre-screening based on the stuff that Prolific already has available to it. Or you can just say, I don't care, and everyone can see your study. You can also pay more by getting representative samples. So if you wanted to be able to say that you had an equal number of men and women, you can do this. It will cost more, but it's just an additional service that Prolific has. Right. So Prolific sort of removes the moral ambiguity, as you would have heard me spend a lot of time explaining, like $7.25, or should we be paying them more? And the federal minimum is different according to different states. Prolific to remove this and just requires a £5 per hour minimum. It doesn't let you go any lower than that. So you kind of get away with paying 10 cents for a 40-minute study. Ensure your estimates of time are correct, because Prolific will also set its own time, which will be slightly greater than your estimate. That'll automatically kick participants off. So this was similar to that MTurk saying, like, how long do you want your study to be active for? Prolific will do that calculation as well by sort of saying, okay, well, if you say it takes 15 minutes, we're going to allow participants up to 35 minutes. Participants will also definitely complain to Prolific if you have underestimated your time. So if you've said that the study will only take 10 minutes and participants are getting kicked out at the 20-minute mark and they haven't even made it halfway through your survey, they'll send through a complaint to Prolific about that, and you might end up having to pay them anyway. So like I said, definitely be correct in your timing so that they know all of that. Sorry, I'm just going to cough and mute myself. I swear it's just seasonal allergies as well. I'm sorry. All right. So you'll put all this information for your participants here. So you'll be saying how many participants you'll collect, how long does your study take, and then, so like I said, Prolific will automatically calculate the 13 minutes that it will sort of there, and how much do you want to pay them. The cool thing that I like about Prolific is the manipulative psychology that takes place here. So I have a 30-minute study and I said I want to pay them £3, which is definitely above the £5 per hour, but it gives me a red arrow and line, sorry, to say, well, that's pretty low. You're really only paying them £6 per hour. So obviously multiplying that. Whereas when I up it to $4.50, so per hour would be £9, it's like, you're doing great. So it gives you kind of, this is not to say that you can't run your study when it's in the red area. It's just, it's obviously sort of giving you this nice feedback to say, well, wouldn't it be great if you paid them a little bit more? So yeah, I think you can tell that PhD students created that because they're trying to manipulate us into this. And then Prolific will also just tell you how much it costs. And it'll include all the fees of your study as well. So you don't have that problem of the random workaround. Prolific's fees are, just to let you know, slightly higher, about 30%, but you know, that might be more advantageous if you just want to run an easier study. So this is what participants will end up seeing. So they'll have a screen with all the studies that are available to them. They'll open it up, and this is, like I said, the estimated completion time and how people are kind of going at the moment. So this was actually, this person can be shamed because they said it took an estimate of 16, and on average it's taking participants 16 minutes to get through it. So this was posted on Reddit as a bad example of why you shouldn't be underestimating your studies. Probably should have removed the university from there, sorry. All right, again, when everything looks good and you've previewed it, everything looks fine, you're ready to launch. Again, a few things to remember if you're using UK participants, as that's their largest sample. Are you launching at a good time? Do you have ethics clearance for your study? Do you know that you're using the funds? And again, are you 100% sure about how long your study takes? And don't be that guy like shown in the previous screenshot. You then start watching the data roll in. So this was from one of our previous studies that we completed. So when your study was launched, and this will be your local time, so you can see that I was punished here having to launch a study at 5 a.m. how much participants are earning per hour. So this adjusts as more and more participants take part, because there will obviously be some people, and you can sort of see it here, that take very little time versus some people that take longer, which is totally fine. This is the eligible number of participants that you had in your study. So we used a pre-screening here and only wanted to collect a specific 180 participants because it was a multi-day study. So we were just inviting the same participants over again. And this is how many participants are in progress versus completed. So we had 138 before we decided to close off the study. So you can then go through and manually approve all of these participants. You can choose to approve all when your study is completed. You'll see the code that they get as well. You can also message any specific participants here, or message all of them, plus install any bonus payments. All right. Prolific really isn't the cure to all of MTurk's problems. You should include the same intention checks as provided previously, and include any warnings as well about the fact that you'll be screening for this. Prolific also provides guidance on acceptable reasons to reject payment. So the study was completed exceptionally fast. Like I said, the 1 second per item, participants missed crucial questions of your study, they failed multiple attention checks, or they didn't fully engage. So if you asked them to write a couple sentences and they only wrote 1 word. If something's gone wrong, there is an error or anything is timed out, people will message you via Prolific as well about this. Again, you should be on your email and the messaging system. You should have Prolific open for the first hour so that you can respond to all questions in a timely manner. Again, approve people, don't automatically reject them if they have no code. See if there's any error there first, or if their data is in your raw, whatever survey platform you're actually collecting them on, and respond to all questions and be nice. I think sometimes we just forget when it's on the internet that these are still participants. The Prolific Help Centre really does answer a lot of questions, especially if you have complicated study designs or want to use additional software. So it's compatible with Qualtrics and integrates with most other downloadable software as well. And one of the advantages here is Prolific has no issue with you collecting participants and getting them to register on a different program. It's best to sort of clear this with them, but we've at least asked them about CIMA and they have no problem with that, because we're not collecting any personal information in CIMA. It's just that we're requiring them to register on a different application. So again, Prolific sort of does have a nicer verification and screening process, but that doesn't mean that bots are any less likely within here. So still include some sort of attention checks to make sure that everything's working okay. All right, any questions about Prolific here?
Nurse, I noticed you said that these participants are mostly from the UK. Sorry if you already said this. Do you know if there are a large pool of participants from other countries as well?
Not a large pool, but they do have pools in Australia and a couple countries in Europe. I think they're starting to break into the US market as well. They're just struggling to compete against MTurk there. They provide a list on their website, and I can also edit the slides to include that. That's a great question. And the other advantage here as well is why they, I think, doing a better job of expanding is, like I said, MTurk only allowed international participants to use money on Amazon gift cards, whereas Prolific pays out directly into your PayPal.
Cool, thanks a lot. And I guess you could pre-screen people based on their country as well, kind of like you could do with MTurk. So you could ask for a representative sample, for example, that balances 50% UK, 50% Australian, or something like that, if there was enough participants.
Correct. If there's enough participants, you could definitely do that. And yeah, if you wanted to collect more participants from different countries, it gives you that option in the pre-screening questionnaire as well.
Awesome, thanks.
No worries. Josh asked a question, is there a Hub Prolific account? Yep, Josh, you're in the Ethics and Wellbeing, and yes, we do have a Prolific account that's just been set up. I'll be sending some information about that early next week as well, so that everyone can start accessing it. Cool. All right. For longitudinal studies, both MTurk and Prolific allow you to create these workers' hits or whitelists, which only allows participants you've created in a list to take part. So for example, we ran this study with 200 participants on day 1 and then only followed up with 150 of them from days 2 to 7. The main whitelist meant that the study was only advertised to those participants, and so only they could take part and no one else. Prolific has the advantage of messaging these participants when the study becomes live. So it automatically sends them a message to say, hey, you've been invited to take part in this message, but it doesn't have an automatic way of launching at the right time. So we were trying to target participants around 4 or 5 p.m. UK time, which meant it was 5 a.m. Australian time. My one recommendation is split that amongst people, because you do not want to be the only person that has to wake up at 5 a.m. for 7 days in a row or earlier. At least I didn't want to, but suffered with that. MTurk allows you as well to create this sort of whitelist or work as hits. It doesn't send them a message though, so it doesn't let them know that it's active. You have to do that. But there is workarounds for MTurk, which I've linked, to be able to do both of the features. So R at least allows you to both message them and also launch it at the right time that you want, so that you don't have to be the one awake super early. Prolific also provides some support for dyadic experiments. So if you had things where you wanted to match people who were doing some sort of task in between them, the ruse that participants are being paired with someone else is sort of a lot harder to pull off online. I think it's getting harder to pull off in the lab anyways, but it's just a lot less believable online when you say you've been matched with someone overseas. It's like, eh. So here are a whole bunch of resources on the MTurk packages that I mentioned. Cloud Research, now I've never used them, so I have no sort of commentary on how good or they are, but I've seen a lot of people switch to them, because pretty much what Cloud Research is they started off as Turk Nation, I think, and these were PhD students that became like experts on using MTurk and figuring everything out. Then they made a business of it, and the idea is pretty much if you don't want to deal with all the hassle of MTurk, you can go to them and get them to run your study on MTurk for you. I think their prices are pretty comparable, and they also do offer discounts to academics, so feel free to check them out. And they also offer this kind of great service for longitudinal based studies there as well. So all the research, all the resources for that are linked. All right, so MTurk or Prolific. Prolific really isn't the savior that it sort of points out to be, and MTurk isn't all doom and gloom, and I really hope that I haven't sort of biased you to thinking that in today's session. Prolific, yes, is more user-friendly, I can't deny that, but its largest pool of participants is only from the UK, and the total pool is much smaller than what's available on MTurk. MTurk can get some getting used to, but it also has a larger sample, and most studies on there are completed within a couple of hours. So you're really being able to, especially if you have large sample sizes, you're getting that pretty quickly. The advice that I've provided here across all of these slides can be applied to both of these platforms. And so whatever you choose as well, my just recommendation is please pilot test at all times. Better that you find a mistake or something that you haven't figured out with only 10 participants than launching with 1,000. Here's a whole bunch more resources. So if you haven't already seen the school's advice for running online experiments that was created as we've all shifted to working from home, the Prolific Help Center, MTurk Help, Turkination on Reddit, which has also shifted to this cloud research. I really do recommend Reddit if people haven't used it before, just to be able to see other common questions that are asked out there. It's just a notice board for posting stuff. And the Prolific one as well is actually monitored by the creators and employees of Prolific. So they're really good about responding to concerns that people have on there. How to do the completion code that I mentioned for Qualtrics and MTurk, and Turkopticon is a place where MTurk requesters are actually reviewed. So for example, you can go on there and see that our ethics and wellbeing hub account has sometimes been reviewed positively for paying really well, and other times negatively for someone that ran a terrible study. So yes, MTurk, you will be reviewed on there, and people will use that to avoid or deal with your study. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Oh, and I managed to just skim this in a minute under the 11. Did I miss anything? Yeah, go for it, sorry.
On MTurk, let's say if you set the time an hour, and what happens if the participants take longer than an hour? Are they still able to finish, or it's going to terminate for them?
If they, for example, if you're running it in Qualtrics, they'll still be active on Qualtrics, but if they try to go back to MTurk will say that they've been booted out, so they won't be able to complete your study. So that's why I recommend making sure that that time is quite open, or well, relatively open, sorry, so that you're not punishing them if they kind of do take longer. But obviously, like I said, if they've gone to watch a movie and haven't completed your study, they do deserve to get kicked out.
Mm-hmm. But like, let's say all my data is still saved on the server, so I will be able to see whether they completed the study or not.
Yeah.
Will I be able to still pay them, even though MTurk said that they can't do that?
Yeah, so you'll be able to go back and manually pay them even if they've been kicked out. So a lot of the time what will happen there is you'll probably get an email from that person if they've been kicked out and they were like, oh, I totally made it to the end of your study, or I was super close and something went wrong. So you'll be able to go back in and manually approve their payment, or sometimes what you need to do is just create a separate hit just that'll go through to them, and then that'll be the thing that approves their payment for them if they do the study. So there are workarounds for that.
All right, thank you.
No worries. Cool. Thank you very much to the many people that have contributed to this, because by no means is any of this my intelligence. But please, if you do have any questions, I'm more than happy to help out and sort of lead you at least remotely in the right direction. I'm definitely sure I've missed some people on this list. So again, thank you so much to them. All right. Thank you all for taking part in today's very awkward me just talking to myself Zoom session. Good luck with the rest of your Zoom sessions, and I hope everyone is doing well. Bye.